Why should we look at gigantic portraits of cacti? What is there to learn from them? This is the question that haunts the viewer upon encountering one of Lee Kwang Ho's canvases. Painstakingly rendered, hyper-detailed, carefully framed and composed, the monumentality of Lee's cacti is a plea for attention, an invitation to look and look again, not simply at the beauty of these incredibly complex plants, but to encounter them anew through the idiom of painting. Why should this invitation be relevant, and why should we pay attention now? Looking is not the same as seeing. One can look at something without ever focusing on the details that tell a story or that reveal hidden threads. Seeing entails a keen approach, a desire to take in and absorb, but also to acknowledge and understand. It is in essence a much more complex and demanding form of engagement with the world. Over the centuries, in Western culture especially, we have become blind to plants. So botanists James H. Wondersee and Elizabeth E. Schlusser have argued in the late 1990s. Plant blindness is essentially our cultural inability to conceive plants beyond prefixed cultural outlines. We deem plants unintelligent, unimportant, uninteresting, and can only appreciate them for their aesthetic beauty or practical usefulness. Lee Kwang Ho's paintings, however, point in a different direction. They ask us to see cacti anew, starting by focusing on the surfaces of their skin to see through it. Leaf, pistils, petals, and stems. The skin of plants is not among the parts of vegetal bodies that quickly comes to mind. Plant skin is an odd concept, and it isn't one that we have been trained to entertain. However, in scientific terms, plant skin is referred to as epidermis, just like the skin of mammals and birds, as well as that of other animals. Like in animals, the epidermis is what separates the body of the plant from the rest of the world. It is a sentient membrane, cold, heat, light, wind. Like us, plants feel through their skin. It allows them to see the world despite their lack of optical vision. It simultaneously connects and protects. It contains and retains. It seamlessly envelopes. A surface among other surfaces, the skin of plants is a place of contact, a receptive field through which the world is interpreted relentlessly. Skins are knowledge makers. If prompted to think about the skin of plants, one might instinctively rush to the bark of trees. After all, a clear distinction between the rough and rugged surface, the outside, that covers and protects the wooden body beneath it, the inside, can rather easily be discerned. Tree bark, with its lines, grooves, and crevices, often resembles fingerprints or the frowny wrinkles on someone's forehead. It is perhaps inevitable that in our minds, skins should first and foremost evoke anthropomorphic visions. But vegetal skin is more complex. Many kinds of plant skins exist in one plant. Radically different textures, thicknesses, and consistencies. Plant skin can be very thin, a single layer of cells that wraps every part of the vegetal body, from leaves and buds to roots. Oftentimes, its thinness makes it unpeelable. Human skin tightly wraps the flesh and muscles. It can be peeled off. It can be turned into tough leather. It can be reconfigured, and it is the possibility of its removal and reconfiguration that grants so much cultural meaning to human and animal skins. Flaying, the act of removing the skin from a living or deceased body, has been practiced by various civilizations throughout history for different reasons, including punishment, torture, and rituals. The Assyrian Empire, which thrived in Mesopotamia from 25th century BCE to the 7th century BCE, used flaying as a method of instilling fear and demonstrating power. Assyrian kings often depicted scenes of flaying on palace walls to showcase their might and deter rebellion. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs also practiced flaying, but their motivations were deeply rooted in religious and ritualistic contexts. They believed in the god Totec, also known as Our Lord of the Flayed Ones, who was associated with agriculture, fertility, and renewal. During the festival of Painstakingly, priests would flay the skins of sacrificial victims and wear them as part of the ritual, symbolizing the shedding of old skin for new growth and the cyclical nature of life and death. Records of flaying exist in ancient Greek and Roman cultures too, though it was less common and often reserved for extreme punishment. In Greek mythology, the satyr Marsyas was flayed alive by the god Apollo after losing a musical contest. For centuries, this myth has served as a cautionary tale about hubris and the consequences of challenging the gods. Saint Bartholomew is traditionally believed to have been flayed alive for his faith. Hauntingly solemn marble sculptures often show him holding his own skin, symbolizing his martyrdom and unwavering devotion. This imagery has been a powerful symbol in Christian art, emphasizing themes of sacrifice and redemption. During the 19th century, the rising importance of taxidermy, the art of preserving animal bodies in a lifelike manner, further reaffirmed the complex power relations that the act of removing the skin from a body entails. Victorian taxidermy is an emblem of absolute power over the animal kingdom. Traditionally, the skin was seen as a vital part of one's identity and essence. Therefore, the act of flaying to take one's skin was often interpreted as a means of stripping away one's humanity, dignity, or it was even seen as a way to reach into their soul. It implied uttermost possession. This act served as a powerful symbol of dehumanization in humans and complete objectification in animals. As a membrane, the skin thus always culturally implies much more than its biological functions, even before we begin to think of its color and texture as racial or social markers. While being utterly external, the skin always embodies the essence of interiority. It summons the nature of a soul from the depths of flesh. But what if the removals of one's skin were impossible, in the sense that peeling it off would leave nothing of the body behind? I am thinking of leaves. What if the distinction between skin and flesh becomes imperceptible to us? The bark of a tree can be stripped off. The naked wood underneath looks bare and vulnerable. In some species, sap-like blood copiously drips over it to heal and seal. But exposed to parasites, fungi, and mold, most trees, like a flayed human, will soon perish. In this sense, tree skin is akin to our own. The loss of tree skin also equates to a loss of individual identity, as well as that of the species. But throughout time, and across different cultures, trees have embodied a distinctive anthropomorphic quality. Their verticality, solemnity, resilience have endlessly fascinated us. Many indigenous cultures view trees as living beings with spirits and personalities. For example, in Potawatomi and Cherokee traditions, trees like cedar are considered sacred and are often seen as ancestors or wise elders. They are believed to possess knowledge and wisdom, serving as intermediaries between the earth and the sky. In African cultures, particularly among the Yoruba people, the Iroko tree is considered a sacred entity inhabited by spirits. These trees are often seen as the dwelling places of ancestors and are treated with great respect. Cutting down an Iroko tree is believed to bring severe misfortune. Underneath their skins, trees, among other plants, have depth. They are unlike others, the lowly weeds, herbaceous climbers, and small shrubs. The thickness of tree skin protects a body deep enough to harbor spirits for centuries or even millennia. Plants with skins so thin that they adhere to their internal bodies and organs in ways that make them imperceptible to us pose a different philosophical challenge. From a philosophical perspective, the entrails of herbaceous or succulent plants are ever so thin, and they are unable to house true identity, ancestral spirits, or even plant souls. Pythagoras, the famed Greek philosopher and mathematician, was intrigued by the structure of Vicia fava, the fava bean, due to the hollowness of its thin stems. His observations led him to believe that the plant's stems served as a conduit between the world of the living and the dead. As a result, he advised against eating broad beans to allow human souls unimpeded movement between the two realms. The hollowness of the fava bean plant was to him nothing more, however, than a passage, like a straw, hollow, not a place deep enough where a soul, a vegetal soul, could rest and permanently reside. The hollowness of some plant species in our minds reduce them in our eyes. The hollowness of some plant species in our minds reduces them in our eyes. It shrinks their corporeality to a level of superficial nothingness. As Plant's philosopher Michael Marder, quoting Hegel, said, begin quote, "If plants have something like a soul, they wear it on their sleeves, so to speak, since the plant's vitality in general does not exist as a state distinct from the plant's inner life." End quote. Philosophizing about plants, at least in the way that Western philosophy has done for centuries, is a complicated matter. Western philosophy often works its way through the messiness of the world by striding toward universalizations. It is interested in the structure of universal rules that connect principles. This process often obliterates the nuances entailed by different plant species. And in this context, cacti certainly are some of the most peculiar vegetal beings. Their skin is often extremely thin, a film-like porous membrane that, however, easily scars. The flesh underneath is soft and wet. It is as fleshy as vegetal bodies can get. But that does not make them more human-like in our eyes. Some plant species are good at communicating their stress and unhappiness through their body language and even through the texture of their skins. Floppy leaves, elongated stems, falling blooms. Plants speak a language we must learn to decipher, but cacti oftentimes just stare back at us, imperturbable, quasi-alien, engulfed in their vegetal silence, unwilling to give away anything about themselves. They staunchly guard their fleshly vulnerability. A myriad of spines remind us to stay away. Cryptic and solemnly prickly monuments, they confront us with an unnerving sense of enigmatic presentness. Surprisingly, the enigmatic presence of cacti has somewhat eluded the intense scrutiny that plant philosophers have reserved for other species with branches and leaves. Cacti might indeed prove too cryptic, perhaps too object-like, for a philosophy of vegetal being that mostly aims at foregrounding the sentience, intelligence, and agency of plants. From a philosophical standpoint, cacti belong therefore to a wholly different category of plants with skin, and as such they hardly fit broad philosophical theorizations. Cacti resist that type of inquiry, posing perhaps an even more intriguing challenge, inviting us to expand and complicate the way we think about plants more in general and our relationship with them, starting from the appearance of their surfaces. Oftentimes, art succeeds where philosophy fails, or at least it reaches where philosophy has not ventured yet. After all, if approached in a certain way, painting can be a formidable philosophical tool. It has been demonstrated time and time again by some of the most daring artists, from René Magritte to Frida Kahlo, Kerry James Marshall, and Lucian Freud. A great painting never simply reproduces reality as we see it, and neither does it fabricate it anew. It reconfigures it. Sometimes in subtle ways, it reaches beneath the appearances to make us see reality in ways we have never considered it before. Painting can stage an encounter that unsettles our expectations, reaching past the veneers of surfaces and bypassing the banality of the mundane. Painting can cast light where language fails to see. Lee Kwang Ho's larger-than-life paintings of cacti are powerful examples of this tradition. Sometimes measuring up to nearly 10 feet in height, Lee's hyper-realistic paintings of cacti are true portraits of succulent glory. Through enlargement and sheer attention to detail, the artist captures every minutia that makes each cactus an individual in its own right. Much of the hyperrealism the artist deploys in such a masterful way lies in the clarity and attention to detail with which he renders the cacti's skin. Areoles, ribs, spines, blooms. Lee Kwang Ho's cacti appear fully naked, their skin exposed with no shame. Each painting of a cactus invites us on a journey of discovery, marks, imperfections, and scars. This is where their beauty lies. In opposition to the Western tradition of the still life genre, in which plants are often represented at the height of their beauty, Lee dwells over the importance of spent blooms, which, like scars and blemishes, evidence the idea of a livingness that matters beyond our aesthetic appreciation. These cacti are beautiful not because they are unblemished or because they have been immortalized in their prime, but because they are naturally imperfect, because their bodies have been co-authored with time into a kind of unrepeatable living poem that can only be read on the cactus's skin. Individuality and the soul are intimately linked. Since according to Western philosophy and major religions, only some plants can contain souls, the portrayal of many plant species is also constantly in danger of simply capturing an object-like sense of hollowness. So during the Dutch Golden Age in the 17th century, as flowers became central to the still life genre, artists filled the superficial identity of plants with Christian symbols. Daisies told stories of innocence, beauty, and love. Strawberry flowers professed the value of chastity. Cherries, red carnations, and poppies evoked the bloody passion of Christ. At times, a combination of color and scent could be woven into a symbol. The whiteness and fragrance of lemon blossoms, lily of the valley, or jasmine, for instance, incarnated the purity of the Virgin. For centuries, the identity of plants, their individuality, and their soul have eluded realistic representation. Lee's paintings of cacti, however, bypass such semantic maneuvers. They resist simple objectification in favor of a nuanced, detailed, and subtle anthropomorphism that wholly respects the individuality of the cactus. His paintings harness the reverence for details that only optical realism can so effortlessly relish. His paintings harness the reverence for details that only optical realism can so faithfully relish, and effortlessly marries it with the compositional tradition of the bust Roman portrait. This coded cultural trope positions the eye of the viewer, predisposing their gaze to explore the body of the cactus as one with that of a human subject. It is this subtle, art-historically grounded strategy, combined with the monumental size of the canvases, that brings the viewer to negotiate a kind of anthropomorphism that, unlike the symbolism of the Golden Age, does not make the plant speak of human affairs, but lets the plant speak of its lived life. Despite their austere demeanor, cacti remain extremely vulnerable. They scar easily, and when that happens, they never fully heal. As often is the case for human skin, a trace of the injury remains. Around the wound, a thickened epidermis forms. This too, in botanical terms, is referred to with a word that applies to human skin: callus. Resistant to infection, this hardened layer of cells might eventually break down and flake off, but a memory of it, often in the form of discoloration, will remain in its place. These scars and imperfections that the body of a cactus so proudly retained through time are the true markers of its identity, a personal narrative that Western capitalist aesthetics have taught us to reject. Nobody wants scarred and marred cacti when shopping in a greenhouse or box chain store. It is rather meaningful that Lee's cacti series emerged in the mid-2010s, following years of work on a project titled Interview from 2006 and another one titled Skin from 2010. In these paintings, the artist painstakingly rendered the nuances of textures and details of people's skin to emphasize his belief that identity is more than something we harbor deeply inside of us. It is especially true in the context of the encounter with a stranger or someone we do not know very well, or perhaps, in the case of cacti, that we can only know them so well based on the qualities of their surfaces. Lee, in a sense, suggests that we might have been all along miseducated in the very essential practice of reading skins by relying on colonialist hierarchies and the racial prejudice that comes with them. Emerging from these philosophical foundations, Lee's cacti series therefore explores this very conundrum, pushing it to the extreme and inviting us at the same time to craft new ways around and through which we might interpret the skin of cacti. This dedication to see more and deeper into what might at first seem like an irrelevant flaw is deeply grounded in the Korean notion of mak, a predisposition to engage with a certain matter-of-factness, a rejection of perfection, a celebration of humility, and a fondness for irregularities and unevenness that can reveal a rich emotional resonance on deeper inspection. These qualities are part of a broader cultural notion that something meaningful might manifest in openness and unscriptedness, an honest void of pretension that finds its fullest expression in the essence of another Korean notion called idiom, a naturalistic understanding of the world in which emptiness and silence are essential Confucianist dimensions through which we can meaningfully connect with the rest of the world. Ultimately, Lee's portraits foreground an important conceptual space in which we can begin to read the identity of cacti anew, starting with their skins. They invite us to embrace the markers of distinction and imperfections that, in a popular culture obsessed with perfection and flawlessness, have become synonymous with wrongness, defects, and shame. Lee's cacti teach us how to better live in our often unforgiving world. His philosophical approach to painting fully respects vegetal essence. It never imposes our voices onto the plants and always allows their true identity to emerge through a careful interplay of irregularities and imperfections, enshrined in the silence that characterizes the core of their vegetal being.